I let my cheating wife's lover think he was getting a divorce settlement until he realized I'd bankrupted him first. The morning I found those text messages on my wife's phone felt like stepping into ice water. My hands shook as I scrolled through months of conversations with her coworker, detailed plans for their weekend getaways, and promises about their future together once she left me. 23 years of marriage reduced to casual mentions of how boring and predictable I'd become, how she deserved better than someone who spent evenings reading financial reports instead of planning romantic surprises. I sat in my home office that day, staring at spreadsheets, but seeing nothing except those messages burned into my memory. The house felt different somehow, like all the warmth had been sucked out of the walls. Every family photo on my desk looked like evidence of a lie I'd been living without knowing it. Our wedding picture seemed to mock me from its silver frame, her smile now appearing calculated rather than genuine. My wife worked late that night, claiming another project deadline, but I knew better now. I spent those quiet hours going through our finances with the methodical precision that had made me successful in my career. Bank statements, investment portfolios, joint accounts, property deeds, everything we'd built together laid out like pieces of a puzzle I was only now beginning to understand. The revelation came when I started digging deeper into her lover's background. He wasn't just some random office romance. This man had been systematically targeting married women in positions of financial comfort. Court records showed 2 previous relationships that had ended in messy divorces where he'd walked away with substantial settlements. His pattern was becoming clear, and my wife was just his latest mark. I discovered he'd been feeding her lines about starting fresh, about how much better life would be without the burden of a husband who didn't appreciate her. He'd convinced her that divorce would be her path to freedom, that she deserved half of everything we'd accumulated. What neither of them realized was that I'd been tracking every conversation, every meeting, every lie she'd told me about working late. The nights became a strange routine of pretending normalcy while secretly documenting everything. I'd make dinner and ask about her day, listening to elaborate stories about meetings that never happened and projects that didn't exist. She'd shower immediately when she got home, claiming she felt dusty from the office, but I could smell different cologne on her clothes before they went into the hamper. My breakthrough came when I realized he'd been using her access to our financial information to plan his strategy. She'd been photographing bank statements, sharing details about our investments, even discussing our mortgage payments. He was building a comprehensive picture of our worth, preparing for the moment when she'd file for divorce and he'd help her claim his share of our assets. The irony was beautiful in its simplicity. While he was planning to profit from destroying my marriage, I was systematically destroying his ability to profit from anything. His business relied heavily on credit and investor confidence, 2 things that could be undermined with the right information placed in the right hands. I started reaching out to his creditors, his business partners, anyone who had a financial stake in his success. I leaked information about his pattern of targeting married women to industry contacts who did business with him. Professional reputation matters enormously in certain circles, and whispers about personal conduct can spread faster than wildfire. Within weeks, I heard through mutual acquaintances that some of his biggest clients were reconsidering their contracts, citing concerns about his character and judgment. The beauty of my approach was its subtlety. Nothing I did was illegal or directly confrontational. I simply made sure the right people knew the right information at the right time. His business credit lines began getting called in early, his mortgage application for a new property was mysteriously denied, and several investment opportunities he'd been counting on suddenly became unavailable. Meanwhile, I was securing our assets in ways that would make them much more difficult to access in a divorce. I restructured our investments, moved funds into protected accounts, and even made some strategic purchases that would complicate any settlement negotiations. Every move was legal and well documented, but it would make his expected windfall much smaller than he'd calculated. The tension at home was becoming unbearable. She'd started staying out later, making less effort to hide her affair, probably because he'd assured her that divorce was their ticket to financial freedom. She'd begun making subtle comments about how unhappy she was, how she felt trapped in our marriage, clearly testing the waters for how I might react to the idea of separation. I played my part perfectly, acting hurt and confused when she mentioned feeling unfulfilled, even suggesting we could try counseling to work through our problems. She'd brush off these suggestions quickly, probably already planning how to use my apparent desperation to her advantage in divorce proceedings. Little did she know that every conversation was being carefully documented for future reference. The first crack in their plan appeared when his business partner called an emergency meeting. Several major contracts had been canceled, and their company was facing a serious cash flow crisis. He'd been counting on steady income to support his lifestyle and his promises to my wife about their future together. Suddenly, the man who'd seemed so financially stable was scrambling to keep his business afloat. I watched from a distance as stress began affecting their relationship. She'd come home frustrated after their secret meetings, probably wondering why her knight in shining armor was suddenly struggling with money problems. He'd promised her a life of luxury once they were together, but reality was painting a very different picture of their potential future. The second phase of my plan involved his personal investments. Through careful research, I discovered he'd put most of his savings into a few high-risk ventures, betting on quick returns to fund his lifestyle. I made sure information about the instability of these investments reached the right regulatory authorities, who began asking uncomfortable questions about compliance and documentation. His cryptocurrency holdings, which had been substantial, became worthless when several exchanges he'd been using came under investigation for fraudulent practices. His real estate investments started facing legal challenges when property titles were questioned and development permits were delayed indefinitely. Every financial pillar he'd built his confidence on began crumbling simultaneously. The most satisfying moment came when I learned he'd been borrowing money against future expected income, probably planning to pay it back with divorce settlement funds. With his business failing and his investments collapsing, these loans became serious problems. Credit companies started calling, demanding immediate repayment of funds he no longer had access to. My wife began showing signs of stress that she couldn't hide. She'd pace around the house during phone calls, speaking in hushed tones about problems at work that clearly weren't work-related. She'd disappear for hours, claiming to be shopping or visiting friends, but would return empty-handed and agitated. The confident woman who'd been planning her escape was starting to realize her escape route was disappearing. The breaking point came when she finally worked up the courage to mention divorce. She sat me down one evening, looking nervous but determined, and started talking about how we'd grown apart and maybe it was time to consider separation. I listened patiently, occasionally nodding as if I was processing this devastating news for the first time. She outlined her vision for our split, talking about fair division of assets and how we could both start fresh. She mentioned that she'd been getting advice from someone who understood financial matters, someone who'd helped her realize what she deserved from our marriage. I could barely contain my satisfaction as she unknowingly described the advice of a man who was currently facing bankruptcy. I agreed to consider her proposal, suggesting we both take some time to think about what we wanted from a potential separation. She seemed relieved that I wasn't fighting the idea, probably thinking her plan was working perfectly. That night, she stayed out until almost dawn, presumably celebrating with her lover about their successful first step toward a profitable future together. The next morning, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. I'd arranged for a private investigator to deliver a comprehensive report about her affair, including photos, financial records, and evidence of her lover's pattern of targeting married women. But instead of confronting her directly, I made sure this information reached her family first. Her parents and siblings had always been protective of her, and they were shocked to learn about her affair and her lover's history. They confronted her with evidence of his previous relationships and the financial ruin he'd brought to other families. Suddenly, the man she'd thought was her salvation was revealed as a predator who'd been manipulating her for his own gain. The revelation devastated her. She genuinely believed he loved her, that their connection was special and real. Learning that she was just another mark in his pattern of exploitation shattered her confidence and made her question everything about their relationship. She came home that day looking like she'd seen a ghost, all her earlier confidence replaced by confusion and fear. But the story wasn't over yet. While she was dealing with the emotional fallout of learning the truth about her lover, he was facing the complete collapse of his financial empire. His business had been forced into bankruptcy, his personal assets were being seized to pay debts, and his reputation was so damaged that finding new employment would be nearly impossible. The final twist came when she discovered that he'd been using her information to hide assets from his creditors. He'd been transferring money into accounts using her personal details, making her unknowingly complicit in his financial crimes. When investigators started asking questions about these transactions, she realized she could face legal consequences for his actions. She begged me to help her, admitting the affair and explaining how she'd been manipulated. She was terrified of facing legal charges and desperate to salvage what was left of our marriage. The woman who'd been planning to leave me for a better life was now clinging to me as her only hope for avoiding disaster. I watched her panic with cold satisfaction, knowing that every consequence she was facing was a direct result of her choices. The man she'd thought would rescue her from her boring marriage was now dragging her down with him. Her dreams of financial freedom had become nightmares of legal liability and social humiliation. The community gossip was merciless. Small towns don't forget scandals easily, and the story of her affair with a con artist became the subject of countless conversations. Her friends distanced themselves, her family struggled to support her while disapproving of her choices, and her professional reputation suffered as news of her involvement spread through local business circles. Meanwhile, I maintained my position as the wronged husband, garnering sympathy and support from people who saw me as the victim of her betrayal. I played the role perfectly, appearing hurt but dignified, disappointed but not bitter. Everyone praised my restraint and maturity in handling such a difficult situation. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. With documented evidence of her affair, her involvement in her lover's financial schemes, and the clear pattern of deception, the divorce settlement was heavily weighted in my favor. She received far less than she'd expected, barely enough to start over with her damaged reputation and limited prospects. Her former lover disappeared from town before the legal consequences could catch up with him, leaving her to face the fallout alone. The man who'd promised her a better life had abandoned her the moment his schemes collapsed, proving that his feelings for her had been as fake as everything else about him. I kept our house, most of our investments, and my reputation intact. The business contacts I'd cultivated over the years continued to respect me, and if anything, my handling of the situation enhanced my standing in the community. I'd turned a potentially devastating betrayal into a demonstration of strategic thinking and emotional control. The months that followed were peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I no longer had to pretend ignorance about her affair or worry about what lies she might tell me next. The house felt like mine again, filled with my choices and my priorities rather than the compromises marriage had required. She moved into a small apartment across town, working a job that paid much less than she'd been accustomed to earning. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about her struggles through mutual acquaintances, but I felt no sympathy for her situation. She'd chosen to betray our marriage for the promise of easy money, and now she was living with the consequences of that choice. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just about revenge, though that was certainly part of it. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't the boring, predictable man she described in her secret messages. I'd outsmarted both her and her lover, anticipating their moves and countering them with precision and patience. Looking back, I realized that discovering her affair was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to take control of my life in ways I'd never considered before. I'd spent years trying to be the husband I thought she wanted, but I'd never been the man I wanted to be for myself. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones planning to hurt us the most. My wife had shared my bed, my meals, and my daily life while secretly plotting to destroy everything we'd built together. Her lover had smiled and shaken my hand at social events while calculating how much he could steal from me through her. But in the end, their greed and dishonesty became their downfall. They'd underestimated me, assuming I was too trusting or too passive to fight back effectively. They'd mistaken my quiet nature for weakness, not realizing that I was simply careful and methodical in everything I did. The financial strategies I'd used to protect myself became a template for other men facing similar situations. Word of my success spread through certain circles, and I began receiving requests for advice from husbands who suspected their wives of similar betrayals. I'd become an unexpected expert in protecting assets from unfaithful spouses. My life settled into a new rhythm that I found surprisingly satisfying. I could make decisions without considering someone else's hidden agenda, spend money without wondering if I was funding my own betrayal, and sleep peacefully without worrying about lies and deception. The loneliness I'd expected to feel never materialized, replaced instead by a sense of freedom and authenticity. Sometimes I wondered if she ever thought about what her life might have been like if she'd chosen honesty over deception. We might have worked through our problems, found ways to reconnect, or at least ended our marriage with dignity and mutual respect. Instead, she'd chosen the path of betrayal and manipulation, and now she was living with the consequences. Her former lover never recovered from his financial collapse. The last I heard, he was working menial jobs and living in a different state, his reputation so damaged that starting over required complete anonymity. His pattern of targeting married women had finally caught up with him, and the consequences were more severe than any of his previous victims had managed to inflict. The whole experience changed my perspective on trust and relationships. I'd learned that people are capable of extraordinary deception, even those we love most. But I'd also learned that careful observation and strategic thinking can protect us from those who would exploit our trust and generosity. In the end, I'd turned their attempted betrayal into my own victory. They'd planned to profit from destroying my life, but instead, I destroyed their ability to profit from anything. The cheating wife and her lover had learned that some men are more dangerous when they're underestimated than when they're obviously powerful. The story became a cautionary tale in our community, a reminder that actions have consequences and that betrayal often destroys the betrayer more than the betrayed. I'd proven that patience, intelligence, and careful planning could triumph over greed and deception, even when the odds seemed stacked against me.